Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please remember to like and subscribe for more maths videos. In today's video, we are going to be covering adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. In order to add and subtract fractions, we need to make the denominators the same. Now, to make the denominators the same, we are looking for the smallest multiple that's common between the two denominators or the three denominators, depending on how many fractions you're working with. The first rule, however, is to remember that we always want to convert a mixed fraction into an improper fraction before we start. So always just check, do I have any mixed fractions? If I do, first convert mixed fraction into improper fractions. If you're unsure of how to do that, make sure to catch the video on converting mixed fractions into improper fractions. In this video, however, we are going to be talking just about adding and subtracting fractions. So, if we are looking for the lowest common multiple that goes into both of the denominators, or that both of the denominators go into, we can also call that a lowest common denominator. Lowest common denominator. That makes sense. The smallest number, lowest, common, that's the same between both of them, denominator. I'm reminding myself, I'm looking at the denominator to make sure that the denominators are the same. The other thing we need to remember is that when we're working with fractions, what we do to the top of the fraction to the numerator, we have to do to the bottom of the fraction to the denominator. So what we do to the top, we do to the bottom. What we do to the numerator, we do to the denominator in order to keep our fractions equivalent, so that we're not changing the value of our fraction, we're just changing the way it looks in order to help us add and subtract them effectively. Let's get into it. If I look at 1 over 3 plus 1 over 2, I'm going to start by looking at my denominator. So I have a denominator of 3 and I have a denominator of 2. So I'm going to look for my lowest common denominator. So the smallest multiple that both 3 and 2 go into. So what number do 3 and 2 both go into? And we're going to look for the smallest of them, because obviously with multiples, they're infinite. They carry on forever, which means that I could have many different multiples. So I'm going to look for the smallest one. So between 3 and 2, we can agree that our lowest common denominator, our lowest common multiple between 3 and 2 would be 6. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this fraction over the denominator that I've just decided on, which is 6. Now I'm going to say to myself, what do I do to 3 to get to 6? I'm going to times it by 2. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. So I'm going to times the 1 by 2. If I look at my second fraction of 1 over 2, what do I do to 2 to get to 6? I times it by 3. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top as well. So I'm going to have 2 times 1, which is 2, plus 1 times 3, which is 3. So what I can now do is I can add the numerators together. So 2 and 3 is 5 over the denominator that I chose of 6. Alright, if I look at this next example, I have 3 over 5 plus 4 over 7. So I'm going to look at my denominators of 5 and of 7. So I'm going to decide what the lowest common denominator or the lowest common multiple would be between 5 and 7. So what number do both 5 and 7 go into? 5, 10, 7 doesn't go into 10, 15, 7 doesn't go into 15, 20, 7 doesn't go into 20, 25, 7 doesn't go into 25, 30, 7 doesn't go into 30, 35, yes, 7 goes into 35. So the LCD, the lowest common denominator, is therefore 35. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this over my denominator of 35. So I'm going to say to myself, what do I do to 5 to get to 35? I times it by 7. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. What do I do to 7 to get to 35? I times it by 5. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So now I have 7, so I'm going to do this fraction first of 7 times 3, and 7 times 3, 7, 14, 21, plus, and now I'm going to do this part of 4 times 5, and 4 times 5 is 20. So now I'm going to say the numerators added together, so 20 plus 21 is 41 over 35. Now I would be able to make that into a mixed fraction because the numerator is bigger than the denominator, so this is an improper fraction. However, I could also leave it as an improper fraction so long as it's fully simplified. So if I were to make this into a mixed fraction, what would I do? I'd say to myself, how many times does 35 go into 41? So I know that 35 goes into 41 one time. But what will be left? What will be left will be 6 out of 35. All right, looking at the next example, I have 2.5 plus 3 over 4. Now, 2.5 is a mixed fraction. And the first step is that we're always going to make a mixed fraction an improper fraction to make it easier to work with. I'm going to start by converting 2.5 into an improper fraction. And how do I do that? I say 2, the whole number times the denominator, and then I'm going to add the numerator. So I'm going to have 2 times 2, which is 4, plus 1 is 5, over the original denominator, which in this case is 2, plus 3 over 4. So now when I look at the denominators, I have a 2 and I have a 4. But I can see that 2 and 4, 2 goes into 4, and 4 goes into 4. So the LCD is actually one of the denominators in the question. But I'm still going to work it the same way. I'm still going to write the LCD being 4, because the lowest common multiple between 2 and 4 is 4. So now I'm going to say, what do I do to 2 to get to 4? I times it by 2. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. What do I do to 4 to get to 4? I times it by 1. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. Now I'm going to put this whole thing over the denominator that I've picked, which is 4. And I'm going to do this first part of the fraction. So 2 times 5 is 10, plus 3 times 1, which is 3. So 10 plus 3 is 13 over the denominator of 4. Now what if I'm subtracting? Well, subtracting works exactly the same way as adding. So for both adding and subtracting fractions, we need a lowest common denominator, a denominator that's the same between the fractions. So I'm going to look at my denominators, and I have a 3 and I have a 5. So what is the LCD? What is the lowest common denominator between 3 and 5? What is the smallest number that both of those numbers go into? Well, 3 and 5, the LCD would therefore be 15. So now I would be able to put it all over 15. Then working with both the fractions, I'd say, what do I do to 3 to get to 15? Well, I times it by 5. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. What do I do to 5 to get to 15? I times it by 3. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So now, working with the first fraction, I have 5 times 11, which is 55, minus the second fraction, 2 times 3, which is 6. So 55 minus 6 is 49 over 15. Now, I would be able to leave that as 49 over 15, but I want you to quickly pause the video and convert 49 over 15 into a mixed fraction. Okay, let's see if you were right. Did you get 3 and 4 over 15? Looking at the next example, we have the denominator 9, we have the denominator of 3. So, when I'm looking for my lowest common denominator, between 9 and 3, that is 9. Because 9 goes into 9, and 3 goes into 9. What do I do to 9 to get to 9? I times it by 1. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. What do I do to 3 to get to 9? I times it by 3. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So now I can write out my denominator, my common denominator of 9. I'm going to do the first fraction, 1 times 8, which is 8. And I'm going to subtract it from the second fraction, which is 2 times 3, which is 6. So when I subtract the numerators, 8 minus 6, I am going to get 2 divided by, or 2 over 9. Alright, looking at the next example, I can see that I have 1 1/4, which is a mixed fraction. So my first step is to convert that mixed fraction into an improper fraction. How do I do that? 1 times 4, and then I'm going to add the numerator of 1. I'm going to have 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5, over the denominator of 4, minus 3 over 7. Now I'm going to look at the denominator of 4, the denominator of 7, and I need a lowest common denominator between those two numbers. So my lowest common denominator between 4 and 7 would be 28. What do I do to 4 to get to 28? I times it by 7. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. What do I do to 7 to get to 28? I times it by 4. What I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. So now I'm going to have my denominator being common that I've chosen of 28. 5 times 7, this first fraction here, is 35, minus 3 times 4, that second fraction there, which is 12. Now I'm going to simplify that. 35 minus 12 is 23 over the denominator of 28. I hope this video helped you to understand how to add and subtract fractions. Remember, the more you do, the better you'll be. Like and subscribe for more videos on fractions. See you soon.